Well, I think to simplify, there are 3 stages in your life. The first stage in your life is when you're learning and you're dependent on others. Go to school, come out, graduate from school. It's very different from the second phase of your life, where you're working, others are dependent on you, and you're trying to be successful. And that's what largely your audience is in that early stages.
Absolutely.
So I'm so excited to speak to them. And that whole arc is totally different. Like on the first arc, first part of the life, you pretty much follow a track. What schools, parents taking care of you, whatever it is, and then what decisions do you make? You hardly make any decisions. You make, okay, what college do you go to? If you go to college, then you go to the college, and what major do you have? And then you come out to this world, the second stage, in which really the whole thing is wide open to you, particularly if you don't stay on a track. You realize that there's no instruction manual and you can go anywhere and you can do anything. And then it's a very different phase. It's a more difficult phase. And that second phase then has an arc to it. And then somewhere in the vicinity of your last phase, that's the phase where you're free to live and free to die. And your preferences change. You change. Your relationships with others change. So that's the life arc that I'm referring to. And so I'm in the transition from the end of my second phase to the beginning of my third phase. And at that phase, I just want to pass along what I've learned to help people who are early in their second phase. The personal discovery is important. I think that who you're with and where you are is more important than what you do. Because in the early phase of that second phase, it's total discovery. So many people say, I can't be that way because my job won't allow it, which is a silly concept, because you have the freedom of those choices, even when you have constraining situations. So I think that's the life arc. Enjoy this wide open choice. You can be anywhere in the world. You can do almost anything. Let go, experiment, and then move on. When I was 12, I got hooked on trading markets. So I loved that game. So I discovered it early. And then I wanted to, but I had this sense of adventure. I discovered when I went to work at a company that working at a company was not my thing. I got fired. I punched my boss. And I really then learned the freedom. I didn't have any idea that I was setting up a company. I just sort of said, I can do these things. Probably like you discovered, okay, I could do those things. And then one thing leads to another, and then, you build. And I always like the variety. So my nature is macro. So I like going all over the world, all different cultures, understanding how the world works. And so I found something that clicked through that experimentation. Lots of ups and downs. So we need to talk about failure, how great failure is. So there's this cycle. So a certain type of personality wants a taste for adventure. You go out and have the adventure. And then there are the ups and downs. And then you crash. You will have a failure. If you're adventurous and you're pushing the limits, you will have a failure. And that failure can be a transformative experience. I have an expression that pain plus reflection equals progress. So they call it the abyss. And change, the learning of humility, to maintain your aggressiveness, your audacity, and to simultaneously learn humility. And that happened to me. I was, you described it. I graduated from school. 2 years, I worked on Wall Street for 2 years. I got fired from my job. And 2 years later, I'm running my little company. Something like 7-8 years after that, I made terrible mistakes in the markets. I crashed. And I lost everything. And I was so broke that I had to borrow $4,000 from my dad to help pay for my family expenses. And it was publicly because I was on Wall Street Week and I made all those mistakes. And that was one of the most painful. Pain can be great because it changed my whole perspective to decision making. As I'm saying, it gave me the humility I needed to operate with my audacity. In other words, to simultaneously be bold and aggressive, and also to know that I could be careful. You know, I learned that if you're doing risky things, anybody who does risky things, tightrope walk across buildings or whatever, it's that they also know how to deal with the risks well. So how to be bold and to learn from the failures. And it changed my whole approach to failure. I began to think of failures like puzzles, that if I could solve the puzzle, I'd get a gem. And the puzzle was, what would I do differently in the future? And the gem I would get would be a principle of how I would deal with the future differently. So understanding that if you press the limits, you're going to fail, and it's okay. And life is a long journey. Failure has a tone to it that it sounds like it's an end. No, it's part of that process of learning and then making that great advance. But the humility combined with the audacity was helpful, because then I would go to try to find the smartest people I could find who disagreed with me. That independent thinking. And I would also know how to deal with my risks better. So I kept my upside without losing my downside. So that's failure and pain. If you look at the second order effects, if you make the most of them, they're the most valuable. How do I be bold and aggressive? And I pull it off. And it's the same way, right? You start to think, well, maybe I do this or that differently, and I practice more. It's that combination of the caution and practice that allows you to take it to the limits that you never would have been able to take it to before, right? I learned that. Once I learned that, everything changed. Because I also would know how to take the hits. In other words, I don't mind getting banged, but I don't want to get knocked out of the game.
Yes.
So the willingness to get banged but not knocked out of the game is a big part of that. I think the key is to think of reality as you're given. Reality is reality. And think of it as working like a machine. There are cause-effect relationships that make the realities around you. Okay, now, if you go above yourself and you look at that, how does that machine work? And then, how do I interact with that machine to get what I want? And you do that with an equanimity. Meditation also helped me a lot.
Yes.
I learned to meditate many years ago. If you have equanimity and you look at it above and you look at it with curiosity, you say, oh, I must not be interacting well with my reality, and how do I change it, and how does it work? It's a very powerful way of approaching life. I today think about success differently. It's like the way I thought about it originally when you have this failure. I thought that it's like there's a jungle out there. I want to have the greatest life possible, but in order to be successful, I have to cross this dangerous jungle. I could stay on the one side of the jungle and have a boring, safe life, but unless I deal with the risks and return go together, and it's like going into this jungle. So what would I choose? Would I choose to go into the jungle and cross the jungle and have the greatest life possible, but I might get bad things might happen? And then I started to think, when I went into that jungle, of course I had to cross the jungle, but I started to realize how to cross the jungle, most importantly, with people who could see things differently than I could on the mission with me. And so, and we would protect each other in that jungle. And that's what it was like. So life is a lot like that. Who are you in the jungle with? And they might see things differently from you. And then you protect each other and you go through. And the thing that I discovered was that as I had these successes and failures, and much more successes than failures, I began to realize that I didn't care as much about the success as I cared about the journey. Okay. In other words, I didn't want to get out of the jungle. I didn't want to get to the other side, because it might be like, I don't know, climbing mountains or doing whatever you realize. There's a new peak and there's a new level of success, and it won't keep you happy. Okay. You don't sit there. You want to go on.
Yes.
And it is the ups and downs of that journey and the striving into becoming better, that becomes the new definition of success. And so I started to see my life in this life arc way, with my preferences changing, because your preferences naturally change as one has kids and as they start to think. I mean, everybody that you're dealing with is going through a life arc. If you think about who are the people you love, what is your relationship with your parents? What are your relationship? Do you have children? They will have a life arc. And as you go through that life arc and you see those things changing, then you start to realize that operating consistent with that life arc is, and on that journey to evolve well, is what success is. It's not the money. It's like money loses its marginal utility very quickly, right? If you studies of happiness, there's a Harvard professor, many professors, I suppose, and they tell you the same thing in terms of studying happiness around the world. There's very little correlation between how much money you have and the level of happiness past the basic subsistence level. The element that there's the highest correlation with is an element of community, who you're with. So it's this meaningful work. Are you on a mission? And meaningful relationships through a life arc that evolves. So that's it. My definition of success is more like evolving well and contributing to evolution. It was an evolutionary process, you know. So you're on a mission. You're on a mission.
Yes.
And you have people who are on the mission with you.
Yes.
And then you start to, I started to find what do I want in those people and what should the relationship be. And I first just picked people I liked. And I didn't realize how we see things differently, how we process things so differently. Our minds work so differently. And so when you start to see, let's say, there's a big picture thinker, there's a detail thinker. And we all become frustrated with the other person because they, like the big picture says, why are you so hung up with those details? Let's go to the big picture. And the detail thinker thinks, you've got your head in the clouds. You've got to come down to the nuts and bolts. And they're both right. And they start to realize that you need each other. You start to need the different ways of thinking. So I would convey that many people see things very differently. And how do you deal with those differences in seeing? There are disagreements. How do you deal with disagreements? My approach, and I learned, is whenever you're in a disagreement and you don't know how to deal with it well because it's not going well, pause and then step above the disagreement together. And then say, what are the protocols for us to disagree well? How should we do this thing? Always go to the higher level and think, how should you do that thing? And so you get protocols. I've developed these protocols. Like a protocol would be, like if we're not being able to communicate well together, a standard protocol is let's mutually agree on someone who will help moderate this conversation, and then we'll work things through. Or talking. How do I repeat what you're saying so that I'm conveying that I understand? And you start to develop those types of protocols and start to develop the appreciations of people seeing things differently. You discover also differences in values, differences in the most core principles of how people should be with each other. In my case, it was so essential that we're going to be completely radically truthful and radically transparent with each other, right? And that was my discovery. And it's difficult, but I've also learned that many cases, the difficult things are only the first order consequences. They're difficult. The second order consequences is they're rewarding. And so by being able to have that radical truthfulness and that transparency to demonstrate that there's no spin was a discovery. So there's an evolutionary arc. I would say in my culture, in my building an organization, a community that was beneficial, I'll describe it in one sentence.
Yes, please.
Long sentence. It's an idea meritocracy. In other words, it's a place where the best ideas win out regardless of hierarchy. So an idea meritocracy, and with the goal in which the goals are meaningful work and meaningful relationships. Meaningful work to be on a mission together, And meaningful relationships is an equal importance of that. And that produces this tough love. So I'll repeat it. I'm saying it too many words. So it's an idea meritocracy in which the goals are meaningful work and meaningful relationships through radical truthfulness and radical transparency. Let's talk about that radical truthfulness and radical transparency. If you can achieve it, there's no confusion. Because if we're really truthful, we're taking all those hidden agendas and all those other things, and we're not confused. We're putting them on the table.
Yes.
And if you understand the art of thoughtful disagreement, how to disagree well so that you can then learn from each other or get past your disagreement in an idea meritocratic way, it is incredibly powerful. We're not taught that. We're not taught some of these things. We're not taught the value of failure.
Definitely not.
We're not taught, we're taught to be right, to be attached to our views of being right.
Yeah.
You can't learn if you're attached to being right because you think it's embarrassing because you don't know. So that notion of thoughtful disagreement, because if there's disagreement, somebody must be wrong. And how do you know that wrong person isn't you? So these are the things that if you have thoughtful disagreement, radical truthfulness, radical transparency, you build trust and effectiveness. The greatest tragedy of mankind, big statement, the greatest tragedy of mankind. The greatest tragedy of mankind, because it's so much, it stands in the way of so many people making decisions well and operating well with each other, is holding an opinion in your head that's wrong. It's such a tragedy, meaning it's so easily fixed, that all you have to do is put it out there and stress test it and say, I might be wrong. And how do I stress test it? And by stress testing it, you raise your probabilities of being right. So I think the education system rewards being right. So many things reward that being right that stands in the way of taking in all that's out there to really help you be right. Whatever success I've had in life has had much more to do with my knowing how to deal with my not knowing than anything that I know. Because what I don't know is vastly greater. Think about all the experts that you can turn to and all the perspectives that you can get and how much you can learn by what's being out there. And that maximizes, and it's a kick. What I found was that whenever I would make an important decision, I would write down my criteria for making that decision because that situation would come along again. So I could be clear. It helped me clarify my thinking. And when the next time it came along, I would start to see how to deal with that, and I could refine my principles. So the book is a compendium of these principles that I wrote over 25 years on that situation. It changed my way of thinking, and it also changed my way of interacting, because then I would see everything as another one of those. Rather than be in the blizzard of these bits and pieces of things coming at me, I would start to think, oh, it's one of those.
Yes.
And I would then operate as what was my principle. And those principles became like internalized. So think of it almost like a batter batting against a pitcher who sometimes throws curveballs, sometimes throws fastballs, sometimes throws sliders. And if you do that over a period of time, you begin to learn, oh, that's a fastball. And then you start to think, okay, the fastball, I operate this. And you start to internalize. You become better and better, and life becomes simpler for you because you're not seeing those millions of bits and pieces. You're seeing it as another one of those. And you have that instinctual ability that allows you to then make that decision and operate that way. And then you can communicate with people on principled levels, thinking. You know, it's particularly important because I would say the decline of religion, in other words, even your values, you have to think, what is your religion? If you chose a religion, and it's not a preconditioned religion, what are your values? What are your principles? How do you think life really works? And you're making choices for yourself. That is the form of those principles. So when you start to think about those and you're clear about those and you can communicate with others, you can see whether your principles are aligned with others or not. Because if you don't get along with somebody, those irreconcilable differences are due to the fact that there are deep differences in principles, not differences in interpretations of things and so on. It's like any great relationship. There'll be arguments along the way, but it is those core beliefs. And by being clear about them, clear to yourself and clear to others, it's very powerful. Where are you going? What for? What are you seeking to fulfill? What is it in you? I recommend to your listeners,
please
write them down, okay? Do your reflections, and then you write them down. It helps, it clarifies it. The other thing that happens is, I think of the mind as being, there are almost two yous in you. There is a conscious, logical you, and there's a subliminal, emotional you.
Yes.
That you don't understand. That was Freud's great discovery.
Yes.
That there is a part of your brain that is really controlling you, but because it's not conscious to you, you don't know it's there and it's controlling it. And the key, I think, is to align those things. Like there's intuition or there's those emotions. And when they come up, and you're seeing yourself doing things, if you can reflect on yourself and align your subliminal with your cerebral, it helps you because you have a double check. That emotional thing, like maybe it's an intuition. Well, maybe it's right and maybe it's wrong. So respect it. It's coming up, but look at it with that logical. And when you achieve that alignment, writing helps you do that. And then you'll start to see that there's a limited number, maybe a few hundred, maybe a couple hundred circumstances or whatever. You're going to start to see everything happens over and over again. You're going to understand yourself better. It's very wonderful. I think the big choice in life, a lot of big choices in life, but is accomplishment versus savoring life. Okay? So, savoring life is smell the roses and what a beautiful day, or that moment, make sure you time with the people that you love and all of that. And then there's the other, which is accomplishment and impact, right? So there is those kinds of choices. You have to discover yourself. Well, where are you and how do you deal with those types of things? I think the most effective is where they align.
Right.
Okay? That's I think the key.
Right.
Like to make your work, your passion one and the same, right? That kind of thing.
Yes.
So that's I think that's the best.
Yeah.
Okay? Your accomplishment, if you're passionate, and then you can maybe have those things align. But that's the choice in life, right? And you could see that in different cultures. First phase of the life is, you learn, and really it's generally a lot of fun. And also, by the way, you think you can conquer the universe. And then you come to this other phase where it's all open and so on. And what you find out is there are too many things to do. You don't have enough time. Okay, you don't have enough time for each one of those things. And so the question is, how do you deal with that? Well, there are two ways you can deal with it. You can, of course, prioritize, and you need to do that. But the real way, most importantly, is to know how to get the most out of an hour. In other words, you can put more life into life if you know how to get leverage and if you know how to be as effective. Because if you get more out of each hour, wow, then it's like more life within those constrained number of hours. I think that there's 5 steps to success. First is you have to know your goals. You have to know what you're going after. That does require prioritization. Second is on your way to your goals, you're going to encounter your problems, your failures, your problems. So that's step 2, encounter them. They're standing in your way. Number 3 is you have to diagnose those to the root cause. What is producing your problems at the root cause? And that may be that you, or it may be those around you who are not good at things or whatever, or you're doing something you need to do better, Or it may be that you're in the wrong place. But you have to get at the root cause to do that diagnosis. Once you know the specific thing that's standing in your way, that personal discovery process, you have to go to the fourth step, and that fourth step is to design a way to get around them.
Yeah.
If it may be, for example, that if you have a particular weakness, work with somebody who is strong where you're weak. Or it may be a change your job or whatever it is, but you've got to get around that specific thing that you've diagnosed as standing in your way. And then when you have a design, you have to do it. A lot of people come up with designs, but they don't push through and do it. And I think life is just the constant 5-step process over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Because if you can do those 5 things, you will be successful. You'll evolve fairly quickly. I do believe that I can do anything, and that it is just a matter of my character and my creativity. So that it is a personal test of me. It may be difficult, and I have to be creative enough, and maybe with the help of others. And that is largely true. Really, if you're creative enough and you don't have to do it yourself, you can get the ideas from other people, and then you are enough character in it to do it. Wow. When you start to realize that actually you can't see, it's like going from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, or black and white to color, that when you start to see things through others' eyes, you can see the world in a totally different, much richer way, and you know how to navigate it. It's such a power, such a gift.